Okay, we're about 2 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to kick us off because there's a lot of information that we have to go over today. So I'll introduce myself and then we'll get going. So I'm Cheryl Kohler. I'm a member of the NoRedInk Partnerships team. And I've been here for about a year now. I was in the classroom a little over a decade ago. I taught K-6 music and loved it. So I spent time in a Title I school, had a varying set of challenges teaching students of different abilities. It's very difficult to differentiate. And then I ended up leaving the classroom as a result of a reduction in force, started working for a large children's publisher and spent quite a bit of time in the balanced literacy realm, moved over into another company that focused on plagiarism detection, and then most recently spent some time in the early childhood arena with a quality measure around interactions between caregivers and children. So since I've joined NoRedInk, I've spoken with hundreds of educators about the challenges that they face when teaching students how to write. So today I'll be sharing with you the top reasons that schools use NoRedInk Premium to support students, both in the classroom and from a distance. And we'll have some Q&A at the end, some poll questions, and then we'll keep this fast and fun. So we'll be raffling off t-shirts at the end. You can see my NoRedInk shirt in black. The back says, "The past, present, and future walked into a room. It was tense." So if you enjoy puns, then you're definitely going to want to get in the running to get that t-shirt. So before we do that, let's get you started with the lay of the land here on the webinar. I'm going to turn off my video, so you will only see my screen moving forward. So just a few housekeeping items. Please be sure to submit any of the questions that you have through the GoToWebinar panel. We'll be answering your questions in the Q&A at the end. So my colleague Brendan, whose picture you see on the slide there, he's from our support team, and so he's here behind the scenes, and he'll be collecting questions as they come in so that we can address them at the end. So keep an eye out for polls and be sure to submit your answers quickly so that we can continue on with the presentation. And you're welcome to log into your own NoRedInk account in order to follow along and navigate some of the features that we cover today. And don't forget about the t-shirt raffle. So if you log off early, you'll miss out. So be sure to stick around. So if you're here with us today, I can assume that you've already started using NoRedInk in the classroom. And some of you may use NoRedInk for years or months, but we know some folks here have just found out about NoRedInk, and so we welcome you. Here's a little background regarding how it all began. So when you created your NoRedInk account, our creator, Jeff Scheuer, was the first to email you and thank you for trying us out. Jeff taught high school English for 8 years in Chicago, and he created NoRedInk in response to the daily challenges that he faced as that frustrated teacher on the left. His class load included about 170 students, which equated to about 40 to 50 hours of grading and providing feedback on each assignment or paper. So even when he passed papers back, he realized that his kids didn't know what to do with the feedback. If they could read it, they often couldn't understand it. And there was nowhere for them to practice the skills that he wanted them to work on, and no way for him to track whether or not they were improving over time. So NoRedInk was created as an answer to those challenges, first for grammar, but over time, it has grown to incorporate a comprehensive focus on writing skills and the writing process. So the entire design of NoRedInk, the whole reason Jeff created it, is to make your life as a teacher easier. So to frame our conversation, let's just discuss the basics of how NoRedInk is structured. So there are two sides to the platform. The skills and practice side, which allows you to diagnose existing knowledge or gaps on the skills that students need to work on. And this is where you can have students complete targeted adaptive practice as they master those skills. And then you can follow up with quizzes on our assessment side to assess for understanding. On the other side of NoRedInk, we have the writing component. These are powerful composition and revision tools that put those skills to work in active writing applications. So big picture, here are the things that we're going to cover today. So it's always best to start with why. So we'll look at the case study results from a few implementations of NoRedInk Premium. Next, the reason that you're here is to explore what's included within Premium. So we'll be sure to touch on that. And as for how, we'll take a look at how NoRedInk can support the various learning structures that schools have adopted during the pandemic. Next, We'll help prepare you for that conversation with your administrator. So what will interest them the most? And finally, we'll touch on the tools at your disposal to help garner support at your school site. So let's start with a quick poll just to get a sense of who's here today and what teaching looks like for you this year with all of those challenges as a result of COVID. Okay, so get your answers in quickly. Should be able to select from the multiple choice and then click that submit button. All right, we're almost done. Make sure to get your answer in there. All right, and the poll's closed down, so really interesting information. So it looks like most of you are still completely remote. So you might be in your classroom teaching virtually, or you might be at home still teaching virtually. And it looks like we have, large percentage that are also teaching in a hybrid model. So what we will cover today is how NoRedInk can fit into both of the models, how nimble it is if you're in classrooms or out of classrooms. So thank you for voting and sharing how you're starting out the school year. All right, so moving on. Okay, so we talked about the why. Let's go into those case studies because this is the best way to know if NoRedInk is going to get results for you. So here's a study where NoRedInk's effectiveness was evaluated by a third party named Wested. It was about 7,300 middle school students in urban, suburban, and rural settings. So Wested was researching the relationship between topic mastery on NoRedInk and then the subsequent student growth on MAP. So for students who used the site very little and mastered very few topics, they had about expected annual growth on MAP. But students who used the site frequently in class and mastered a high number of topics, they averaged nearly 2 times the growth of a normal year, which is where you see that 37% number in the second bullet point. So 37% of students grew by 2 grade levels, or 200% is another way to look at it. So for every 10 topics mastered on NoRedInk, that's where we saw 20% annual growth on the MAP test, which is incredibly compelling data. This case study is from a high school in Illinois, and they were really struggling from a lack of consistency. Students weren't engaged in the curriculum, and they weren't seeing any growth in writing. So they started using NoRedInk as a 5 to 10 minute daily bell ringer, and the results are phenomenal. So the students who use NoRedInk averaged a 55-point improvement on the reading and writing portion of the SAT. So I've included the national average here. This is an increase of 50 to 60 points that can really make a difference for students' college entrance. On the ACT, the impact was even greater. So you can see the average national score for ACTs is 21, and students who use NoRedInk grew their scores 6 points on average, which is substantial improvement. In Wiley, Texas, they had students at different ability levels, even though they were at the same core classes. So, and they didn't know if they were making progress against standards. So teachers struggled to differentiate instruction for their varied student populations. I love seeing these results by subgroup. So you can see that the percentage of students who met the master's grade level score on their annual standardized test doubled. So here's that major jump. And then for economically disadvantaged, it more than doubled as well. And there were some nice gains for limited English students and those with disabilities. So you can expect to see similar results with consistent, thoughtful implementation of NoRedInk yourself. So what is NoRedInk Premium? And how does it differ from the free version that you're already used to using? So this chart is a comparison of what you get with one versus the other. And after the presentation, you'll get a more detailed side-by-side comparison of free versus premium, but you can also see this in the handouts if you want to look now. You're likely here because you've been using the free version and you've come across those little yellow locks on some of the content. And when schools purchase NoRedInk Premium, they get access to all of that content plus a lot more. So the locks unlock all of the additional content. The functionality of the free version is the same as premium, such as personalizing for each student, but you're lacking the majority of the content with the free version. Free is only about 20% of everything that we offer, whereas premium allows you to be much more comprehensive because you have 1,000+ topics plus all of those writing tools. So think of it this way. Free is designed for evaluating the program, but premium is intended for actually improving student writing. So let's dig into what this looks like in the program. Before we get to that, just want to point out what is going to be top of mind for your administrators. So if you are planning on taking this conversation to your principal or maybe a coordinator, these are the things that we will review later on in the presentation, but I just wanted to present them to you now so that you can keep these top of mind as we look through the live platform. So let's get into that live platform. All right. So we're going to go into NoRedInk.com. One of the first premium features is that we sync with Clever. So it allows you to have an active roster updated on a nightly basis. And so you would just select that login with Clever option from NoRedInk.com, you and your students, so that you could access everything that NoRedInk has to offer. It is a premium only feature. If you don't have Clever, that's perfectly fine. You can continue logging in through Google or with the email username and password. So we're going to log into my free account, okay? And we're going to go into the assignment library where it says browse and assign. And you can see those 4 activities that we were reviewing before. So as I click into practice here, we're going to look at all of the topics. And you can see the topics are listed on the right side. Sometimes there's multi-paragraph passages. But these expand out into, each pathway expands out into multiple topics, okay? Now, those are those little yellow blocks that I mentioned before. So much of the content that's here is free, but majority of the content is only available on the premium version. So what this means is, in free, you're kind of sporadic with the way that you're selecting different items. You have to be sporadic in the way that you're engaging students in practice. So you might be able to diagnose these pathways so that you know your students need to work on adjectives or appositive phrases. But then if you don't have access to the full scope and sequence of our pathways, you can't fully remediate to help your students build the skill work in this topic or in this skill. So let me also lay out the way that we build out our pathways. We start with the most basic application of a skill, and then we build towards the most complex. So if you're skipping over some of these steps, your students aren't getting that scaffolding and building from one set of knowledge to the next. Okay, so let's go down into something a little bit more complex with our thesis statements. So here you can see we even have interactive tutorials on some of these items. But you see how much content is locked out. So out of 11 topics, only 3 of them are available on the free version. And again, they are sporadic versus if you had the premium, you would be able to scaffold for students moving from one topic more complex to the next and so on and so forth. Now, if I click on one of these, I'm actually going to go into our premium platform so that we have access to the premium. Let's just look at a single practice topic, because there's another feature that is premium only, and that's our text to speech. So this little play button here allows you to have the text read to your students.
Taking notes by hand is better for students' overall academic performance.
So you get the idea. And this is super helpful for your struggling readers or your ELL students, especially when they are learning at a distance. So incredibly helpful tool so that they can hear the text on the page as they're working within NoRedInk. So this is just an example of one of the interfaces that we offer where students have to identify where claim, evidence, and reasoning are. So I'm going to do that real quick just by selecting my highlighting colors and then submitting the answer. Okay, so let's go into our assignment library again. With 1,000 topics, how are you going to filter down to what is relevant to your state standards or assessments that you're working towards? Well, we do have this standards and test feature over here. In the free version, you only have access to some grade level bands that kind of have generic recommendations for the grade level that you're teaching, but you can browse by alignment in the premium, which allows you to look at what's heavily, moderately, or lightly tested. Right now, I'm just looking at ACT, and then you can see the pathways that specifically align with that assessment. Additionally, you'll notice that there are state standards. So if I select South Carolina, for example, I can drill down into what's relevant to those state standards. Now, for your state, you will only see what's relevant. So in Texas, I won't see South Carolina or Arizona or all of the rest of those. I'll only see what's relevant to Texas, for example. So great filters here to ensure that what you are having your students work on in diagnostics or in practice or in quizzes is exactly what's going to help prepare them for their standards or the state and national assessments. All right, so let's go into one more feature on the assessment side, and those are our passage quizzes. So we have the ability to have students test skills within a larger context. So instead of working with just one paragraph or one sentence, they're working multiple paragraphs at once. So we do have some that are aligned to ACT and SAT. It tests these skills in the same way that ACT and SAT test them. Again, it has that text-to-speech feature that I showed you before. That's a premium only piece. And then students would go through each paragraph and then cycle through the different options, paragraph after paragraph, and they submit their answer and get immediate feedback regarding how they did. You can see I didn't do so well because I'm not paying attention. But then if I want to correct any of these misconceptions, I would click on the exclamation point. It highlights where I made an error. I can click on that error to see the correct answer against what I answered. It has a mini lesson explaining the rule, and then I can transfer that skill into a completely new problem altogether and submit it in. So it's a great way to prepare your students for some of those high stakes assessments, and then also present a new challenge to students, especially if they're G&T kids. So instead of just one paragraph or one sentence, try out the passages, which are a premium only feature. I'm going to take you into the student data piece now. So how are you going to monitor how students are actively working on assignments within NoRedInk? Our Mastery tab allows you to use the same filters that we looked at before so that you can ensure your students are on track to master all of the skills that they'll need when that assessment rolls around. So again, I'm going to choose ACT just for now. And you can see I can filter down by what's heavily, moderately, or lightly tested. So in this view, I might spend a little more time on commonly confused words 5 because my students still have plenty of work to do there, whereas I have some students that have already mastered the previous commonly confused words pathway. So let's move on to the writing tools. I'm going to go back to the assignment library. I'm going to click on writing tools here, and you can see the 4 different assignment types that we have available. These are those powerful composition and revision tools that I mentioned before. So quick writes for short form writing, guided drafts for more extended essay projects, and then peer review and self-review so that students have the ability to review or take their writing through multiple iterations and make revisions along the way. With quick writes, right now you have access to quick writes and you can start assigning them out to your students, but we've added in ready to use prompts. And so you have a handful of prompts available to you on the free version, but in the premium, there are 180 quick write prompts, or about 180 quick write prompts, and some of them focus on building out specific skills like concision versus wordiness, commonly confused words like there, and there, and so on and so forth. So you would have access to all of these prompts that are ready to use, ready to assign out just at the click of a button. Going back to our writing, we're going to look at the guided draft, but I want to show you on the free version because, again, we're going to find those yellow locks. If I click on a guided draft, the only genre that's available is argumentative writing, and then you have access to nearly 10 times the content within the premium version, all of these other genres. And we are going to be adding an ACT essay within the next month or so. So that is coming very, very soon. Let's go back over to our guided drafts and take a look at the narrative piece. We're going to preview it. And this is what a student sees. So the first thing that a student will do is go through an interactive tutorial that explains the conventions of this genre. These tutorials, like I said, some are available in the free, but not all. Most of them are premium only content. This allows you to use this in a whole group setting, or maybe when you're synchronous learning. And then a student will see it individually when they're working on their own. So here in the first thing they see is the rubric, and it has all of the criterion that they'll be held accountable for. The rubric is customizable in the premium version. If you're using the argumentative free guided draft, you'll have access to our rubric. You will not be able to customize it. But in all of the other genres, including argumentative, if you are a premium user, you can customize these. We have some basics that we include, like the beginning of the narrative sets the scene. And so then the student can see examples of what this looks like. So they have scaffolds and supports at their fingertips while they're in the process of writing. As I move past that initial prompt, my rubric stays on the left side so I can access any of those examples. But then as I click into the composition areas, that's where it pops up with specific scaffolding to support students as they're writing on their own. So they don't have to come to you necessarily until they really get stuck or really are struggling. We're trying to keep them writing on their own with everything that they need to be successful. View tutorial will show them a tutorial specifically around the beginning of a narrative essay in this scenario. I can see examples of full essays with the hook, set the scene, and introduce the conflict and theme highlighted within the larger context of that longer form essay. And there are multiple examples. The tips and tricks piece down here on the left side, these are just common ailments that we know that students struggle with as they're writing an essay. So they do have examples here, and students can cycle through our suggestions. So again, they can be successful as they're writing. But what do you see as the teacher? So let's go into a teacher view. Also, there are ready-made prompts for the guided drafts as well. I didn't mention those before, but you do get about 300 guided draft prompts in the premium version, ready to go, ready to assign out the same way that we were just assigning out a quick write. So this is the teacher view after a guided draft has been turned in. You have access to every draft that a student has completed and submitted. And then we also have the ability to leave inline feedback. As I highlight specific text, it gives me the option to then type up the feedback that I want to leave. Okay. On the right side is where I would grade based off of the rubric for that assignment. And then I can leave generic feedback, including saving the feedback because I know there will be common things that I want to comment on for every student as I filter through all of my grading load. So we're going to go back to the writing activities that we looked at before. I'm not going to go into peer review and self-review in great detail, but I do encourage you to connect with your NoRedInk representative so that they can spend more time really showcasing what these tools are all about. Really, peer review allows you to anonymously have students review each other's work. So they would focus on a component of a longer form essay, maybe just the thesis statement or just the introductory paragraph, in the same way that they've worked on those skills on the skills and pathways side of NoRedInk. So we equip them with all of the knowledge that they need to offer quality feedback to their peers. It's a wonderful tool, especially if you're using it from a distance. Self-review helps guide students through the process of reviewing their own work so that they can take it through multiple iterations, taking into account how their essay should flow, what elements should be included within that essay, and so on. The final piece I'm going to show you that is a premium only feature is the training on the upper right-hand side of the screen, because we have these self-paced on-demand modules which allow teachers to learn how to use NoRedInk effectively, how to use all of the tools that I just showed you and more to get those gains from your students. So let's go back to our presentation. What did you love most about the features that you just saw? So we did show you, some of the skills and practice side of things. We showed you some of the quick writes and the guided drafts, talked a little bit about the filters. We didn't go into great deal on self-review and peer review, but if you're trying to facilitate those things in your classroom, it might be helpful, of course, to have those types of tools, especially at a distance. Okay, so we'll give it a couple more seconds just to gather the feedback. Go ahead and click that button and click submit when you're ready. All right, and we're going to lock it down and look at those results. All right, so it looks like the quick writes and the guided drafts had a ton of excitement around them. So I love the guided drafts personally as well. I think it's an amazing tool that can really help students be successful as they're writing at a distance or in the classroom as well, so that you don't become the bottleneck to all of their questions. The diagnostics, the quizzes, the growth quizzes, super helpful when you're trying to monitor student growth within the classroom. So wonderful feedback. Thanks so much. All right, so let's move on. Still a lot more to cover. So why this year? How will this help with COVID-related learning losses and then, of course, teaching at a distance? Let's continue on. So a big topic of concern for the districts that I work with, and probably for many of you, is just addressing the learning loss that occurred during the spring due to COVID shutdowns. And you know that it's likely much greater than your typical summer slide. So the tools that NoRedInk provides can give you a better understanding of where those learning gaps exist and then provide you with ways to address them. So you can see the planning diagnostic here on the left side, and you can access that without Premium. But like we mentioned before, only Premium allows full access to all of those writing skills and grammar and convention topics. So you might be able to identify somewhat what individual students needed the practice in, but not have the tools to address those gaps unless you have access to everything in Premium. If you're like Jeff with about 170 students, it can be difficult to personalize learning and track student growth. So NoRedInk makes that easy with our diagnostics, the growth quizzes, and adaptive practice engine. And during distance or hybrid learning, following a unit cycle structure like what you see here, where you pre-assess, have students practice, post-assess, it can provide some consistency and expectation for students from topic to topic or skill to skill that you work on a week or bi-weekly basis. We've heard educators use the term synchronous and asynchronous learning recently, and our tools can support both scenarios. So take the interactive tutorials, for example. Each tutorial walks students through the most important points that they need to know about a topic or an essay genre, like that narrative one we looked at before, and then it gives them 1 or 2 practice questions to check for understanding. So features that support students before they come to you for help are even more useful in this setting that many of you are in. So where you're fielding questions from students virtually. Interactive tutorials remind students of the best practices when you can't be there to check in and give those reminders as readily. So a wonderful tool for asynchronous learning are the guided drafts that all of you were so excited about. So we know you can't be connected with every student when they need help, so these built-in scaffolds are designed to keep kids learning. And with Premium, this feature is available in the 9 genres that we looked at before, and soon to be 10 once we add in that ACT essay as well. More on the guided drafts. So we have those prompts at your fingertips so that you can keep students regularly writing. So there's about 400 total ready to use prompts, but of course, NoRedInk allows you to create your own and customize if you need to. So NoRedInk is a resource that until now, most users used in school. And there's continuity in routines, materials. So if you're transitioning between home and school, it makes that transition more seamless. We didn't dive deep into self or peer review during the demo, but I'll point out just a few distance learning supports here. So when completing a self review, students are prompted to critically think about the choices that they made as a writer and how closely they stuck to the conventions of the genre. So I like to think of this as prompting the student to put on editor glasses as they look at their own work. After they've made appropriate revisions, teachers can see the draft side by side. So imagine seeing this kind of visibility or having this kind of visibility when you're conferring with students. In a similar vein, peer review gives you the visibility into students' revisions and thought process as they reviewed their own work, as you can see on the right side. So facilitating any peer activity during distance learning can be a challenge, but NoRedInk's peer review allows for anonymity whilst also equipping students with the skills that they need to provide quality feedback to others in the class. So what do teachers find most valuable? Teachers usually tell us that it's easy to use, it allows tracking of and monitoring of students' progress, it's flexible, similar to what we've gone over already. They like that it has the quality lessons and solid teaching practices so that they don't have to source content elsewhere, right? It's all in one place, it's all ready to go, ready to use, so that makes their lives a little bit easier. Additionally, it's easily differentiated to meet the needs of all of the students in the classroom. Okay, so what do admins care about? What are you going to talk to them about when you ask for NoRedInk Premium or ask for funding to make that upgrade? So number one, what does NoRedInk do that other resources don't? Only you know what else you have at your disposal in terms of resources. So you can speak to what those other resources might be lacking that NoRedInk might fill a gap for. So ask, are there other resources where funds are being wasted? Are there other resources that you can maybe jettison in order to make room for NoRedInk? Many times we see that reading and math resources get the bulk of the dollars, but what about writing? If that's a priority at your campus, NoRedInk would be a wonderful fit to help improve writing scores at your school. Data. They're definitely going to want to know how this is helping students grow. And you have that diagnostic data, you have the data from your growth quizzes and diagnostics, and you can do those on the free version so you can show your administrator what it can do for kids. But in addition to that, remember those case studies we went over before. So you do have access to all of those. Aligning to standards and improving test scores. So they definitely want to see achievement. You want to be that high achieving school. So it all comes down to priorities. If writing is an identified need, your goal will be easier to achieve, right? But if it's not, make that connection between reading and writing. We know that literacy is holistic. And so if you can leverage the way that NoRedInk supports Sorry, I just got muted, so I just unmuted myself. If you can leverage the way that writing focus can support reading development, then that's sometimes a way to get your admin to take notice. The personalization and adaptive learning pieces, the differentiation that comes from NoRedInk is absolutely something you want to talk about with your admin. How do you personalize for every student, especially if you have, like Jeff had, 170 kids? And we hear from teachers so often that it's so much more engaging than anything else that they use for writing. So do talk about that engagement piece as well if you see that your students are enjoying the content. Ease of implementation, they want to know if they spend money on it, are you going to use it? Well, if you already have teachers at your school that are using the free version, we just unlock additional content. So of course, if they're already using it, it'll be easy to implement the upgrade. Cost versus value. So go beyond the price. You always want to accompany pricing with the value of what it is that price is getting you. So we hear from teachers that many times they'll go to a principal, and that typical principal response is do some research and find out how much it costs and then come back and tell me about it, which is all great and good. And that's many times that that's the reason that we connect with teachers so often, is because they've been given that task to complete. When you go back to your administrator, what you want to say is, so I have the price, but let's start with why I think it's worth it. And then of course you can touch on all of the previous points that we just went through. The final piece is just longevity of implementation. Will the funds be there for annual renewal? We see better implementations when you have the support of your administrator or your coordinator, instructional specialist. So getting them involved in the conversation early can absolutely help, especially if you're going to renew in the following year. Okay, funding. So what funds are there to help you get this? So number one, we never want a teacher to dip into their own pocket. We don't allow that. So we encourage you to approach your administrator and use those school funds because they're specifically earmarked for supplemental resources just like ours. Okay, so there's an instructional materials allotment that you can usually rely on, and your principal would know if those funds are available. Federal title funds, it really shouldn't have been affected much by the pandemic at all, specifically Title I, which is intended to help students on free and reduced lunch. And so if you have a Title I coordinator, they would have access to those funds most likely. Title III is intended for our ELL students. So you would have to focus just on those students, but many times it's a good way to kind of pilot and start using NoRedInk Premium to then expand later down the road if you can't get a full expansion up and off the ground initially. And then Title IV funds are earmarked for technology and could be used for software like ours. There are still some stimulus funds that are out there floating around. Specifically, they're called CARES Act funds. So you could ask about those. I know in some states they just delivered them out to school districts. And then the HEROES Act funding is still being debated on Capitol Hill, so it may be coming down the pike in months to come. So just kind of keep your ears open on the news about that funding. I mentioned literacy grants. So these are good ways to get NoRedInk Premium for the first time, right? So approaching your PTO or PTA, asking your education foundation to fund this. Those are good routes to start with NoRedInk Premium so that you have even more data at your fingertips to then take to your admin down the road so that maybe you can secure school funding afterwards. But think about that longevity, because if you come to rely on NoRedInk, we would hate for that renewal to pop around and that funding to no longer be there, and then you don't have the resource anymore. So do think about a plan for ensuring that you have access not only this year, but in future years as well. Administrators will also appreciate that NoRedInk gives them access to a live report regarding the activation of expected teacher and student users, usage stats around the curricular tools that we've explored, and then skills that students are mastering in relation to state standards. So in addition to the full access to the content, you get those training modules that we looked at before. Additionally, everyone receives support from a CSM, a customer success manager, no matter the size of their school, which is particularly important at this time when we'll likely be moving back and forth between home and at-school learning. So they help to make sure that you're getting the most from the program, but they can also provide you with custom professional development. You'll also get priority online customer support and access to a searchable teacher help center and invitations to premium webinars focused on best practices for implementation. So that was a ton of info, but bottom line is that Premium is available for schools and districts. And the first step to getting that process started is to go to noredink.com/premium and connect with your NoRedInk representative so that he or she can prepare a custom quote for you. So pricing depends on the size of your school or how many students you want to work with. So your representative will be able to tell you how many other teachers are using at your school in your district and equip you with resources to help with that conversation as you approach your administrator. Put us to work for you. So our team is ready to support your conversations with your colleagues and also administration. So we'll make sure that you have all the tools that you need to advocate for NoRedInk Premium at your site, as you can see on the slide here. And we'll send you links to each of these, but you'll still need to contact your NoRedInk representative through the method that I just mentioned to discuss those implementation options. A huge advantage of speaking to reps is that you can bounce your ideas off of us and how you want to approach your admin. So we're here to support you. So with that, I will take some questions because I know that we've had a couple that have been fielded here from Brendan. So the first question that we are going to answer is, if I start using the free version, can I keep my classes and students after upgrading to Premium? So the quick answer is yes. So your classes, your assignments, and data will retain, and you'll have access to the full curriculum. So we basically unlock the additional content so that you can continue on as you have been, but you'll just have access to so much more. The one caveat to that is if you are switching to Clever, we do have to switch you over to Clever. So that's something that you want to talk with your NoRedInk representative about. Notify them if you do plan on using Clever Secure Sync. Okay, more questions. So wondering about the cost and if it's possible to sign up for just a few kids. Because of that support that you get from a customer success manager, we do have thresholds in place. So we have a minimum of students that we will license out at one time. Okay, and that minimum is 100 students. So something else to be mindful of in terms of cost is that at most, it will be $15 per student, but depending on your situation and your school, it could be much lower than that. So talk to us and we'll let you know how much it'll be for your campus and the way that we would structure it for your implementation. So will NoRedInk ever allow teachers an individual subscription? Please consider this. As of right now, we work with schools and districts for those school and district implementations. Like I mentioned before, we see the best implementations come when the support from the administration is there. So as of right now, we do not license out for individual teachers. We do have that 100 student minimum, but it is something that we are requested quite often. So it is on our radar. Okay, I believe there may have been, Brendan, are there any other questions that have been submitted that you feel that we need to answer?
Yeah, so we actually did get some questions about different LMSs that we're compatible with. And right now, Clever and Google Classroom are the two big ones, but I would encourage everyone to write in and let us know, what your school uses at support@noredink.com. And it really helps our team get a sense of what would be the most helpful LMSs to explore any additional integrations that we might support in the future.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Any other questions that we should tackle before we get to the raffle? Okay, I see a question about dictation. With dictation, it would depend on your browser. So if your device and your browser has that, as you are writing in a quick write or in a guided draft, that's what you would want to leverage in order to dictate into the text entry field. So any additional questions? Okay, so without further ado, let's go to that t-shirt raffle time. So we know it's not easy being a teacher, especially in 2020. So we commend you for all of the work that you do every day to engage students, make a difference in their lives, support their achievement and social emotional development. So thank you for all that you do. Let's announce the winners. So number one, we've got Linda Hammond, Richard Williams, Jennifer Oliver, Alita Ramirez, Angela Chilton. And that's all, folks. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you. Our entire partnerships team is ready to support your conversations. Thanks again.